Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth weekly podcast of Last to the Mass. My name is Raphael Scribola, and as always, let's start with a prayer before study by St. Thomas Aquinas. Creator of all things, true source of light and wisdom, lofty origin of all being, graciously let a ray of your brilliance penetrate into the darkness of our understanding, and take from us the double darkness into which we have been born, and obscurity of both sin and ignorance. Give us a sharp sense of understanding, a retentive memory, and the ability to grasp things correctly and fundamentally. Grant us the talent of being exact in our explanations, and the ability to express ourselves with thoroughness and charm. Point out the beginning, direct the progress, and help in completion through Christ our Lord. Amen. All right, let's then go on to introductions. My name is Raphael Scribola. We'll do name, education, and favorite sacrament. So I was a student at the University of Michigan. I'm going to be going back there in the fall, currently on a medical leave of absence. But when I was there, I was a major in philosophy, PPE, which stands for Philosophy, Political Science, and Economics, and Cognitive Science. And my favorite sacrament, I would have to say, is the Eucharist, especially after going to daily Mass for over a year. That's just such an incredible sacrament. All right, and I'll turn it over to Michael now.
All right. Hello, I am Michael, and I graduated from the Thomas Aquinas College in Santa Paula, California, where I earned my bachelor's degree in liberal arts with a heavy emphasis in philosophy and theology. And what I would say is, well, basically, Raph stole my favorite sacrament. But I suppose then another really good sacrament that I like, or at least I like seeing performed often, is baptism.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like there's no right or wrong answer to this. They're all just such great sacraments. I mean, yeah, even just confirmation. I think confirmation is probably the most underrated sacrament out there. But yeah, I definitely, it has such an effect, and you wouldn't think it, but it does. So yeah, and obviously sacrament of the rite of the anointing is so important. Just to get that as you're dying. Yeah, I mean, all of them just really great. All right, so with that, we'll turn to the main event of the evening. It's just going to be me and Michael today. But the whatchamacallit, the point of this podcast, what we're going to be talking about is gambling a sin? So I feel like this is a really good one, especially given the U.S.'s recent lifting of the ban on U.S. sports betting. Yeah, I'll get into that later, but we'll just examine what the Catholic Church teaches from that point of view, and hopefully you will come away from this, whether Catholic or not, better educated on the morals of gambling, and you'll understand the reasons why maybe it has been so heavily restricted in the past. All right. Okay, so all these articles are going to be linked below, by the way. So, but the first one we're going to go through is the Catholic Encyclopedia. Now, the definition of gambling, as the Catholic Encyclopedia says, is gambling is the staking of money on the issue of a game of chance. The issue must depend on chance, as in dice, or partly on chance, partly on skill, as in whist. Whist is just a card game. It was a card game at the time. Kind of like euchre for all of you Midwesterners out there. If you don't know what euchre is, then I'm sorry, you've had kind of a sad life. Yeah, there's a remedy to that. You just have to move to the Midwest. Don't bet on it, but definitely learn how to play it. All right, so as the article goes on to point out, there is a bad association with this word gambling, but it doesn't necessarily mean that staking of any money on a chance event is wrong. It's just that there are some basic requirements that have to be met. According to the Church, these are kind of theologians kind of agree on this, for gambling to be acceptable. And then there's also this further danger that gambling brings that needs to be eliminated as well. But first, for the four requirements, the Catholic Encyclopedia says that these must be that they are the first. The money must be the bettor's own. So you can't like bet someone else's money, like a client's. And importantly, you also can't bet more than is necessary for the maintenance of your family. So you have a duty to your family to save enough money to maintain them. And I think that's just a really interesting point. You can't bet your house or something. You can't or you can't bet yourself into poverty. You have to, there has to be a limit there. And it's a lot stronger than you might think. Um, Thirdly, the bet must be freely made. You can't be coerced into it. And finally, there can't be any, no, sorry. Secondly, the bet must be freely made. And then thirdly, there can't be any fraud. So you can't play a game of euchre with aces up your sleeves, or a game of, poker or whatever with, with a full house or something, just tucked away, ready there for use. It's got to be according to the rules of play. And finally, there must be some sort of equality between the parties. So, as the Catholic Encyclopedia put it, you can't have like two experienced whist players just wailing on two novices. There has to be some basic equality there. So if you meet those four requirements, then gambling is not inherently a sin. But these gambling so often leads to sin that you can almost think of these as a necessary but not quite sufficient requirements for gambling to be acceptable. Like, these are important. These are necessary for gambling to not be a sin, and gambling isn't inherently a sin, but gambling so often leads to sin in certain situations that it's been banned in the past, and as we're going to get into. As the Catholic Encyclopedia argues, besides, there is generally an element of danger in gambling, which is quite sufficient to account for the bad name which it has. In most people, gambling arouses keen excitement and quickly develops into a passion which is difficult to control. If indulged into excess, it leads to loss of time and usually of money, to an idle and useless life spent in the midst of bad company and unwholesome surroundings, and to scandal which is a source of ruin and sin to others. It panders to the craving for excitement, and in many countries it has become so prevalent that it rivals drunkenness in its destructive effects on the lives of the people. It is obvious that the moral aspect of the question is not essentially different if for a game of chance is substituted a horse race, a football or cricket match, or the price of stock or produce at some future date. So what is being said here is that for most people, the excitement of monetary gain with respect to events outside one's control, even if those events be events based purely on skill, such as a football match. Remember, we said gambling was applied to games which were purely of chance or a mixture of chance and skill. But even if you substitute in games that are purely skill, at best, it leads to bad passions. This keen excitement this keen excitement which is difficult to control, as was just said, and at worst it can lead to an unwholesomeness and idleness, and even sin if indulged into excess. So let me repeat the last part of that quote just to get that point home. It is obvious that the moral aspect of the question is not essentially different if for a game of chance is substituted a horse race, a football or cricket match, or the price of stock or produce at some future date. And St. Francis de Sales backs this up. He lived in the 17th century, and he had this to say with respect to gambling in his famous book, Introduction to the Devout Life. Dice, cards, and the like games of hazard are not merely dangerous amusements like dancing, but they are plainly bad and harmful, and therefore they are forbidden by the civil as by the ecclesiastical law. What harm is there in them, you ask? Such games are unreasonable. The winner often has neither skill nor industry to boast of, which is contrary to reason. You reply that this is understood by those who play. But though that may prove that you are not wronging anybody, it does not prove that the game is in accordance with reason, as victory ought to be the reward of skill or labor, which it cannot be in mere games of chance. Moreover, though such games may be called a recreation and are intended as such, they are practically an intense occupation. Is it not an occupation when a man's mind is kept on the stretch of close attention and disturbed by endless anxieties, fears, and agitations? Who exercises a more dismal, painful attention than the gambler. No one must speak or laugh. If you do but cough, you will annoy him and his companions. The only pleasure in gambling is to win, and this cannot be a satisfactory pleasure, since it can only be enjoyed at the expense of your antagonist. So it seems that St. Francis de Sales is not merely objecting to gambling, which is the staking of money on the issue of game of chance, just to remind you guys, but is also objecting to certain games regardless of whether money is being staked on them or not. Now, unlawful games are a little outside of the scope of this issue, but it seems that here, games of chance refers to the staking of money, as the Catholic Encyclopedia argues. The old canonists and theologians, remember that St. Francis de Sales lived in the 1600s, I believe, remarked that although the canons generally mention only dice by name, yet under this appellation must be understood all games of chance, and even those that require skill, if they are played for money. So, assuming it's true then that games of chance refers to gambling for St. Francis de Sales, and he's not just talking about unlawful games, we see the same theme that gambling is an occasion for sin, since they bring to the surface bad passions. Is it not an occupation when a man's, then here's the quote, again, I'm quoting this again from the quote you just heard, is it not an occupation when a man's mind is kept on the stretch of close attention and disturbed by endless anxieties, fears, and agitations? Who exercises a more dismal, painful attention than the gambler? All right. So up to this point, we haven't talked about civil or ecclesiastical laws, so it might be a bit confusing as to what St. Francis de Sales is referring to when he says that dice, quote, dice, cards, and the like games of hazard are forbidden by the civil as by the ecclesiastical law. He said that at the very beginning of that long quote. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the ecclesiastical and civil laws that forbade gambling, but historically, gambling has been seen as a very dangerous and harmful practice, and it used to be forbidden by both ecclesiastical and secular authorities alike. If you're interested in the full history, again, all the articles are linked below. Take a look at the Catholic Encyclopedia article, which goes into this at more depth. But basically, ancient ecclesiastical canons forbade gambling to force all the way through the Council of Trent in the 16th century. So even the Council of Trent forbade this. Modern ecclesiastical teaching is more lenient, as the Catechism of the Catholic Church says, games of chance, card games, etc., or wagers are not in themselves contrary to justice, which is what we've been saying. Gambling in and of itself is not a sin, as long as those four conditions are met. They become morally unacceptable when they deprive someone of what is necessary to provide for his needs and those of others. The passion for gambling risks becoming an enslavement. Unfair wagers and cheating at games constitute grave matter, unless the damage inflicted is so slight that one who suffers it cannot reasonably consider it significant. So again, in addition to the four requirements that, of gambling for it to be not a sin, we also see this idea that gambling brings bad passions to the fore. I'll quote again from the Catechism, the passion for gambling risks becoming an enslavement. All right, so the question naturally arises then, what should the state's attitude toward gambling be? In May of 2018, sports betting was legalized in the U.S., as I mentioned earlier, overturning a 1992 ban. And this is sports betting, not like casino betting. So, casinos have been operating throughout then, but it used to be illegal, I think, across the U.S. to bet on sports. Since that time, or at least very recently, I know, I'm kind of a sportsaholic. I know I've been inundated with commercials for sports gambling from seemingly like every retired major sports superstar I can think of. There's Barry Sanders, who played for the Lions, Peyton Manning and his brother Eli Manning, who are both very famous quarterbacks, Kevin Garnett, famous Boston Celtics legend. The list just goes on and on. And it might seem crazy now in 2023 to suggest that sports gambling should be banned again, but literally as of 2 seconds ago it was. Like, this is not a foreign idea. And remembering what the Catechism and the Catholic Encyclopedia says, the consequences of gambling so often lead to sin that it's been banned by both ecclesiastical and civil law. And this banning by civil law includes sports betting in the U.S. until 2018. Yes, in 2018, we literally had a ban on sports betting. I know it's hard to believe, but it's true. All right, so wrapping this up, yes, I think prudence dictates that governments should restrict sports betting again, while other forms of betting should also be restricted or even banned outright. I mean, stuff like roulette or slot machines like that, I don't understand how that doesn't fall under the I don't understand how those um, don't meet the requirement, or how those meet the requirements and don't lead to bad passions. Like those going into a casino and playing those types of things, those types of games, you know, that's a serious occasion for sin. And I was reading an article online by a priest. I think he runs a blog called Catholic Straight Answers, and he was saying that he went into a casino and they limited themselves to $20 on slot machines, knowing that they would probably lose all of it, and they did, and it was fine. They lost all of it, but they saw people like just addicted to these slot machines, just over and over and over again, and they saw like a waiter in very fine dress come over and have a guy at a poker table or some sort of table sign away his house, the mortgage on his house. So I mean, just being around that sort of ambience, those sort of people, seeing these people who've just taken gambling way too far, it's just a very unhealthy environment, and I don't, that just constitutes a serious occasion of sin, in my opinion, and according to the Catholic Church. So we come to the answering of the question: is gambling a sin? No, actually. Gambling, as long as you adhere to those 4 rules, gambling is not a sin. But does this mean gambling isn't dangerous and an occasion of sin? Also, no. As numerous canons, councils, and saints have argued, and as civil law, as recently as that of the U.S. until 2018, has said, no, like these are dangerous things, and they ruin families, and they are an occasion of sin, and they need to be restricted for that reason. I'll end with a quote by St. Francis de Sales from his introduction to the Devout Life about St. Louis and Sarah. So once, when he was very ill, St. Louis heard that his brother, the Comte d'Anjou, and Monsieur Gassier de Nemours, I don't know French, were gambling, and in spite of his weakness, the king tottered into the room where they were and threw dice and money and everything out of the window in great indignation. And the pure and pious Sarah, in her appeal to God, declared that she had never had dealings with gamblers. All right, that's it. That's my take. I turn it over to Michael, or if you have a question or anything, I can also go on with that route as well.
Well, I mean, most of what you said, I think, kind of hits close to the mark on basically the teachings of the church on gambling. I can recall one real example of or at least the damaging effects of gambling. I had a friend back when I was in middle school, and his family was broken up because his father essentially gambled their house away. It just, he had a gambling addiction, and he gambled their house away, and it was terrible. And I don't know, or at least at the time, I know like his parents were at least separated. I don't know if they ever actually like tried to officially divorce, but I know they were separated because of that. It was just like they pretty much lost almost everything. He gambled their house away. So I can definitely see the one side where I've seen the damaging effects of gambling. I can definitely see why some people would want to agree that gambling would be a sin, but there's still the fact still remains that when it comes to the matter of gambling, it's on, for the most part, on chance, or chance and skill, and those of themselves do not constitute any sort of sinful action. So I think so something like that is gambling is definitely something that you don't want to indulge in frequently. Um, it that's my take on it. You don't want to engage in it frequently, and um, I also find it kind of interesting where uh, essentially when the church says that, excuse me, that when it talks about like the damage, it's not grave matter it's not grave matter if the damage inflicted is so slight that the one who suffers it cannot reasonably consider it significant. I always found that interesting. So, I mean, you would agree that losing your house to gambling would be quite significant, would you?
Yes, yeah. Right.
Okay. So, but what if I owned like two houses and three cars and I lost one? And it's like, whatever. I lost a house. I have another.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's like,
that's interesting.
yeah, it's like, okay, you lost a house, and a house. I don't care where you're from. A house is a pretty significant loss to me. But it's like okay, I just got another one. It's like okay, sure. So what if I lost one? It's like so. Uh, not I'm not necessarily playing devil's advocate here, but it's like
Yeah.
if someone like that was like kind of. I'm not. I'm also not proposing this example as like a real life example. It's just
Yeah.
like if
Yeah.
someone blows off a loss like that, it's like okay, um, is like is there grave matter there or is there not?
Yeah. I don't know that it would constitute grave matter necessarily, but I think it would still be sinful in the sense of like, um, yeah, like the probability that that person engaged in that gambling without the bad passions that were being talked about, and without the idleness and bad company and unwholesomeness and all of that that was being done, that was mentioned by the article. I think the probability of that happening is pretty low. Um, and you know, even like it is a house. Like even if you have a house and three Lamborghinis or whatever to spare, like that's still a house that you're giving to a casino that could have been used for a charitable purpose. And I think the stakes are still high, even if relatively speaking they are not significant to a person who is that rich. Um, so I would say like 10, $20 among friends playing poker, that's fine. Like that should be fine. Whereas betting a house, even if you're like a rich person who has multiple houses and stuff, I think that's still, I think it would still be, uh, just, yeah, I think that would still be not advisable. Not, um, I'm not sure. Wait, let me check yeah, I mean, to be fair to your point, like it wouldn't be, you wouldn't be betting enough to uh, you wouldn't be betting enough to where your family wouldn't you wouldn't be able to maintain your family, like you still have a house and three cars left over or whatever. Um, but again, like I think the passions, as the Catholic Encyclopedia article said, for most people, the passions that go into that arise from that are going to be bad, and you're going to be most likely indulging in those when you gamble. And so it's possible, I guess, for a person to do that without those passions, but they'd have to be truly detached from material things, and they'd have to have a really strong will or really strong, yeah, I guess will to be able to stop at one house and not farther, not gamble the other house too. Um, so it would just be like, you would just be an occasion of sin, I guess, in that case. Maybe, and probably a sin, most likely a sin, but it might be possible for them not to be um, sinning. It's sort of like, you can walk into a house of prostitution and then walk out without committing sin, but like, why would you do that? It's an occasion of sin. There's no profit to be gained from that. Um, so yeah, that would be sort of my take on it. And I think also, um, my criticisms, I think, in our modern age, I think the two institutions which incur this condemnation, or which would incur uh, my disapprobation the most, would be casinos and sports betting agencies. Um, so casinos, just in the sense of like having, they just have games of chance. They're just purely games of chance, and in fact, they're stacked against you, so the house like always wins on them. And that's just that. I don't think that should be happening. And again, if you walk into one of those and you're able to limit yourself to $20, like that one guy did, then fine. But that's still an occasion of sin that could go awry very quickly. And then in terms of sports betting, I think what St. Francis de Sales was saying is very pertinent to that. Let me just find the quote here really quick. Sorry. Um, uh, yeah, like what he says here, like when you're watching a sports game and you're gambling on it, is it not an occupation when a man's mind is kept on the stretch of close attention and disturbed by endless anxieties, fears, and agitations? Who exercises a more dismal, painful attention than the gambler? Like, it's just unhealthy for your soul. Like, I don't, um, it's okay in small amounts. Like, I want to be clear. It's okay to do it in small amounts, but to do it over and over and over again, or to, to do it in large quantities, that's very dangerous and probably sinful, I think. And I think, as the government, I think sports betting should be illegalized, just like it was 5 years ago, and casinos should be restricted more than they are currently.
Yeah. As someone who used to work at a casino once upon a time, I
Really,
can definitely.
really,
Yes, I
really.
did. Yeah, I used to work at a casino. I wasn't like a card dealer or something like that.
Shame. No, just kidding.
Actually, what I was is I used to be. I learned this from those who were card dealers, but I was actually a steward, so I just basically cleaned a lot of stuff. Um,
Hmm.
but I can definitely confirm, say, yeah, the more often than not, it's the house is stacked against you. Because I mean, well, they got to make money somehow,
Hmm.
and um, and I mean, knowing that, I know I myself would not want to go into uh and bet at a casino because I mean, like, if that's the case, why?
Hmm.
It's like, why? And then yeah, and plus another criticism I would have on top of that is also mostly the fact that, like, most people don't know how to I suppose, like, control the passion for gambling, or a lot of people just they don't they're weak of will, and so they easily fall into addictions like gambling. And so it's like, because I would say most of our um US population is essentially of similar character. It's like, you know what? I'm not sure if gambling if a lot of gambling uh how do I put it? A lot of forms of gambling that occur today are really should be for our use, because it's like, well, uh because a lot of people it's an occasion for sin a lot of the time, kind of like what you were saying.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, like, I'm not gonna go out there and say like, oh, I'm one of the few people who can, who have the a strong enough will to sustain this. Like, no, I don't. Like, if I entered a casino and I didn't limit myself, like, yeah, I might get addicted. Like, that's just a reality. Um, Ultimately, the only thing that would prevent that from happening would be God's grace. But it's sort of like the same thing as with houses of prostitution. Like, you can walk in and walk out and not sin, but like, why would you do that? And also, the only way you wouldn't sin in that case would be just God, like, somehow like miraculously helping you. Like there is the story of that one saint who would go into houses of prostitution, and then um, he would he would talk to the women there and actually teach them the Catholic faith and have them convert. And but that's just like an extreme case. Most people are not like that. Most people are not don't have the ability to keep their passions in check like that. And even those who do rely on God for that, because eventually it's just gonna, if it's not, if the foundation's not on God, then it's just gonna get chipped away. Um, yeah. Uh, yeah, I don't know if I have anything else. I guess I would. Do you have any stories of working at the casino?
Well, only stories that are told to me by others, so they're like secondhand stories,
Yeah,
but
I
it's
see.
mostly just, you'd you'd see people leaving the casino literally quite upset
Yeah,
because they've lost. You can tell that you don't know exactly how much or what they have lost, but you can tell they've lost something that was significant to them. And
yeah,
it's just a lot of little stories like that. And then like okay, and then stories like let's say someone does win and they get a lot of money from it. It's like what they do with their money afterwards, or like what happens to them, like whatever happens to them afterwards. It's just also like kind of terrible to see, because not only are these people not really good at handling the passion for gambling, but they also have proven themselves to be not very good at handling money either.
yeah. Kind of like it's kind of like the lottery as well. My pastor actually gave a talk against the lottery once, um, and it was quite interesting. I don't know. I guess that would kind of fall under the purview of gambling, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think, at least I don't think it's good. I don't know. That's a whole separate topic that I did not prepare for, but it doesn't
Probably.
seem. Yeah, it seems a little strange that that's how the government would make money. But I don't want to like go into that if I don't know what's going on there. But
Well, yeah. I mean, technically with casinos, it's not so much that the government makes money, but it's actually the Indian tribes that own those casinos that make most of the money.
okay, yeah, no, I was talking about like the state lotteries, like the ones you see on the billboard, like
Oh, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Those ones, yeah, for sure.
yeah, like Powerball or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so all right. Well, any final questions, comments?
Um, Not so much questions. I mean, I did wonder a little bit about like the quote from the catechism at the end where basically, the cheating and unfair wagers are, those are grave matter. Those are inherently wrong. Um, and but let's say you didn't have anything like that, you just had a very large significant bet and you lost on it, and okay, maybe you have way more than what you were betting on, you wouldn't consider it significant. So it's just there's that I guess I'll say subjectivity for lack of a better word. There's that subjectivity that I was a little concerned about, because I don't want to pass off anything as subjective unless it's like you got a good look at
Yeah,
the issue, and it's like, and I think I kind of understand why the catechism words it like that. It's the reason why I think that's they have that condition in there. It's like, okay, does the person involved in this bet consider this loss significant? It's because the cause of that being a little bit subjective or conditional is because not everyone has the same financial conditions.
yeah,
And it's like, yeah, it's like, maybe you do have two houses and three cars, and maybe you're like, whatever. It's like, I've only used that house for my summer vacation anyways. Like, I don't care. It's like, you know what? Not everyone has that.
yeah,
um, so I think I kind of understand now why, or at least that part, why the catechism words it that way. And I did have a question on that before, but I think we pretty much answered it in the time we had.
Yeah, and that actually brings up another interesting point, especially with regards to sports betting. Is I didn't think about this, but with respect to the fraud point at the end of the Catechism, constituting great matter, that actually opens up the more possibility or motivation for insider trading, like just having not insider trading, having inside knowledge of what's going on, and then putting a bet on that before, like a huge bet on that or something before sports books have a chance to to do anything about it, or even like bribing players and stuff like that to like the famous Black Sox scandal in uh, 1919, where
Oh yeah.
gamblers basically paid this really good baseball team to lose in the World Series so they could end up with a bunch of money. And I'm not suggesting there's anything happening like that, but if you consider like how lucrative and like how much money is involved in modern sports in America today, and how much money you can get from betting, that is, I'm sure people have tried that before and are trying that now.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
also like there actually has been reported stories of like large bets being made before significant news stories come out, and then like someone's injured, and then the story only comes out like 4 or 5 hours after they're injured, but in that intervening time, like large bets are placed against that team or whatever, and then the sportsbook realizes that this person's injured, so they lower the odds or whatever. But then these people
Yeah.
still have tickets with very favorable odds. So it's just it just is a huge mess, and it's possible to create a huge mess. And I don't, I honestly, among all the other stuff that we said, that's another aspect to consider.
Yeah. For casinos, at least, I know that if you do work at a casino, at least in the one that I worked at, you weren't allowed to come back after work and bet. You weren't allowed to do
Oh,
that.
interesting. Why is that?
Mostly for the reason that you just said. It's like,
Oh,
if let's say I was a card dealer and I knew a trick or two, or I knew that the odds were better for this than for that. Well,
oh,
guess what? Because I worked there, I couldn't go back and bet. I couldn't do it.
interesting. Wow, that's funny. Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense, but wow. Yeah, well,
Yep.
yeah, I guess I've definitely learned a lot today. I mean, I didn't know the inner workings of casinos, and yeah, it's just the whole thing is just sketchy, to put it in colloquial
Right.
terms. It's sketchy, uh, and yeah, it can get beyond sketchy. All right, so let me see where we're at. All right, so we'll turn it over to the presentation section this time. I'm sorry you're gonna have to listen to a lot of me talking, but that's just the way it is, especially with two people, and me presenting both sections. Not having to present, I get to present both sections. So with that, let's turn over to the Gelasian Dyarchy, which we've been discussing in the second half of all of our podcasts so far. If you're unfamiliar with what that is, or you want to find out more about it, there's an article that I linked below, or you can go back to the previous 3 videos and just listen to the second half of those. This is kind of a sequel to the 3 that came before. All right, so in the three, yeah, give me a second here. I need to get some water. I've been talking a lot. Oh, so good. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so we've gone over the Gelasian Dyarchy in the past 3 podcasts, and we've explained what it is. We've shown how it's the teaching of the Catholic faith, and Now we're going to begin to go over objections to integralism from Catholic points of view. And hopefully we're going to split this up into about 4 episodes. So the first, which is what we're going to be doing today, the first objection to integralism is called by Edmund Waldstein or Cistercians, who wrote the really great article below that I'll be referencing today. He calls this movement Augustinian Radicalism, and this movement pertains to the rejection of legitimacy of the temporal power within the Gelasian Dyarchy. So remember how we said that there was a spiritual power and a temporal power in the Gelasian Dyarchy. Well, Augustinian Radicalism basically denies that there is a temporal power. And we're going to get into that and look at what that means. The second objection to integralism, Edmund Waldstein calls Whig Thomism. It pertains to the rejection of legitimacy of the church's power over the temporal. So it's the other way around. Instead of denying the temporal realm, it softens the spiritual realm or diminishes the spiritual realm to such an extent that it's almost non-existent. I hope to break up the discussion on these two movements into 4 different episodes. The first on Augustinian Radicalism, which we're going to do today. The second on Thomas Pinck's examination of Vatican II's teaching on political liberty and Dignitatis Humanae, a Vatican II document. This is the famous document that many people cite as changing the Church's doctrine on the relationship between Church and state, and is even one person claiming that integralism has been thrown into the dustbin due to this document. But we're going to look at Thomas Pinck, who argues that the argument for religious freedom contained in this document doesn't nullify integralism, but rather is sort of a policy thing on the Church's part to not exercise its right to have spiritual authority over the temporal, or something like that. It still has spiritual authority over the temporal, but it's a policy thing not to withhold it for in certain cases. And I still need to read that article, so I don't know very much about it either, but I will by the time the next episode comes around. And then the third is on an article that I have read that opposes integralism. I don't remember the author, but it was found in the National Review, I believe, and it was actually written by a professor in politics at Ave Maria University, so I'm going to put William on the spot for that one. And the fourth is, which is in the current article that is being linked below, is the section of Whig Thomism, what Edmund Waldstein calls Whig Thomism, and that is, as I said before, the diminishing of the spiritual authority of the Church over the temporal. All right, so without further ado, let's get into it. What is Augustinian Radicalism? So this position is loosely based on St. Augustine's City of God and argues that the earthly city, i.e. the temporal government that we've been talking about, is fundamentally at odds with the heavenly city, i.e. the Church. As for its supporters, perhaps the most famous is Dorothy Day, who tried to create a community entirely devoid of money and coercion, and literally based on Christ's teaching of the Sermon on the Mount. As she said, "We must keep in mind the fact that we are active pacifists and anarchists, or peacemaker personalists." She said this in Sanctuary. This teaching that human authority is arbitrary led to conflict within Day's movement. Quote, "William Goshout, who headed the House of Hospitality, furnished an apartment for single women in need, and a married couple arriving first were sheltered there. But when Bill wanted to put a few single women into the empty bedrooms, the couple announced that they had possession and refused to allow them entrance. Our guests know that we will not call upon the police to evict them, that we are trying to follow the dear Lord's teachings. If anyone take your coat, let go your cloak also to him. When another family came to Mary Farm, we explained that we were trying to open a retreat house and that we did not have room for them. It was the family of one of our own willful leaders who loved God and did as he pleased. He did not wish to remain on a farm belonging to his father, where he was forced to work too hard. He and his wife refused to listen and unpack their things to stay with us. First, they took over the lower farmhouse. After a few conflicts due to their possessing themselves of retreat house goods as common goods, they moved to the upper farm to join Victor. For the following year, they continued their guerrilla tactics from the upper farm, coming down to make raids on their retreat house, food, and furnishings, explaining to retreatants that they were true Catholic workers and that the retreat house was a perversion of the movement. That was in The Long Loneliness. So Day was a great saint and is actually a servant of God right now, according to the Catholic Church. But it seems safe to say that although it is true that the Church must renounce control over temporal things, remember, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, we went over that, not related to faith and morals, this doesn't necessarily involve a conflict between church and state. So, yes, we need to make sure the church renders unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. But that doesn't mean that the church, that the state does not have its own legitimate place under the church. It just means that the church needs to detach itself from the state. Not that the state needs to be eliminated altogether. So the other supporters for this movement, I mean, this definitely seems like a pretty out there sort of movement. So it seems to me anyway that the other supporters of this movement are mainly academics, but I think it's worth getting into their thought process to see what integralism is not. So according to an Anglican, John Milbank, the Civitas Terrena, so that's just the city on earth, which is the city on earth, the earthly city mentioned in City of God, is not regarded by St. Augustine as a state in the modern sense of a sphere of sovereignty. There is no set of positive objectives that are its own peculiar business, and the City of God makes a use of exactly the same range of finite goods, although for different ends, end quote, in theology and social theory. So we see here that the temporal realm has no jurisdiction beyond the spiritual, and that its ends are at odds with those of the City of Gods. So a Catholic writer, William T. Cavanaugh, strikes up a similar theme, but argues further that this Augustinian radicalism is to be preferred over the Gelasian Dyarchy. For Augustine, church and coercive government represent two cities, two distinct moments of salvation history. In Gelasius' words, half a century later, there is one city with two rulers. So he sees the City of God and Gelasius' duo sunt as fundamentally at odds with each other. Because of this conflict between church and state, Milbank, this is the Anglican, argues further that any temporal coercion is harmful, even the coercion of parent over child. In any act of coercion, however mild and benignly motivated, there is still present a moment of pure violence, externally and arbitrarily related to the end one has in mind, just as the schoolmaster's beating with canes has no intrinsic connection with the lesson he seeks to teach. Because punishment must, by definition, inflict some harm, however temporary, it has an inherently negative, privative relationship to being, and cannot, therefore, by Augustine's own lights, escape the taint of sin. Did I mention he was an Anglican? That is pretty crazy. I'm sorry. Like, I know I have to argue against this on academic terms, on rational terms, but I'm sorry. I can't refrain from saying that's pretty crazy. The Catholic response to this is that, quote, grace elevates and perfects nature, but does not replace it, end quote. As Edmund Waldstein further argues, coercive power is used for the common good, such as the death penalty, and can be likened to a surgeon cutting away unhealthy tissue. We find our purpose in the common good and in God, not just in ourselves, and therefore are good, consistent participating in the common good and in God. If the government does not provide for the common good, that is a reflection of its failure to subject its sword to that of the churches, but it's not a reason to discount temporal authority altogether. So yes, the US, China, Russia, a lot of other countries, fail to subject their sword to that of the churches, and they commit heinous crimes, and they are opposed to the church. But that doesn't mean that temporal authority on its own is bad and needs to be gotten away with. It just means that the current temporal authorities are not good. That isn't to say that there couldn't be one that was what is a good one. Okay, I don't think I have anything else on that. It was fairly short and sweet. Again, I think that's more of an academic objection, but it does help us see that the need for a necessity for the temporal authority, and that temporal coercion of the state is a necessary and good thing. All right, I'll turn it over to discussion. Any questions,
Well,
comments?
um, let's see. No, quite honestly, or at least I found that the presentation easy to follow, at least for me, at least. I
Mhm.
suppose I was just kind of surprised that there was such a position that I was surprised that there being such a position like the radical Augustinian approach to the temporal powers. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
but
yeah.
yeah,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, no, go ahead. I didn't have anything to say.
Oh, okay. It's just I just that no, that was kind of a new approach for me. Uh, I'm not exactly sure if it was if it was like incredibly popular in Dorothy Day's time, but um, I think pretty much that I don't think that movement really exists so much anymore, unless I'm mistaken.
Yeah, I think Dorothy Day was a convert to Catholicism from socialism, basically, and I don't think she really abandoned her. Or I mean, from my very brief skimming of her Wikipedia article, actually, I think I might have it up right now. Let me take a look. Um, uh, yeah, as it says here, Dorothy Day was an American journalist, social activist, and anarchist who, after a bohemian youth, became a Catholic without abandoning her social and anarchist activism. So it seems
Hmm.
like she didn't really abandon her socialist views so much, but still became Catholic. I don't know. It does seem different from just regular socialism because socialism again that leads to. I think it's more proper to call her an anarchist than a socialist because socialist usually means big government and all of that, whereas anarchist is the opposite of that. So
Right.
I don't really know of a dedicated anarchist movement in the church or even in society at this point. Um, so yeah, I mean, outside of her, I think the only people who would advocate for such a position are academics. Because yeah, you can convince yourself of anything if you're smart enough.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And just like no, it's just that came off as surprising because like I honestly don't know any I'm not aware of any movement at all that at least openly labels itself as both Catholic and anarchical at all.
Yeah, it's pretty strange. I think anarcho syndicalism might have been a thing in the 80s, but that's only based off of Monty Python and is the that one scene. So I guess it might have been a thing back then if they were referencing it, but uh, yeah, I think it's a pretty cut and dry case. Like you need temporal authority. Like you parents have are should be able to govern their own children. Should be able to uh, to coerce their own children into doing the right thing. Like um, you know that's how you. Yeah, I mean it's just so much basic common sense. Like I don't understand that you could how you could sit there with a straight face and argue against that. But that fortunately is something that Edmund Walton gets to do, and not me. So I maybe one day I'll get to spar with people like Kavanaugh and Milbank. But until then,
Right, right.
I don't think it's a real issue at the moment. Okay, well I think we might end early then, slightly early then. And unless there's any further comments or questions.
No, not really. Just beyond that comment that I had, I was able to follow the rest of it easily.
All right, sounds good. In that case, we will turn it over to the random number generator. I don't think Michael is going to be with us for the next podcast. So I'm going to take Michael's question out and just put in my questions, William's questions, and Jacob's questions. and we'll see which one comes out from 1 to 7. Oh, it's 7. That means it's Jacob. All right. The question.
All right.
Oh boy, this is a good one. All right.
All right.
The question for the next podcast is The Lord of the Rings the traditionalist Harry Potter?
That will okay. All right. I would. Interesting.
I mean, if you want to skip work and then jump onto that one, Michael, you're more than welcome to. That one's gonna go down. That's gonna be a good one. All right. Well, if there's nothing further on that, I'll just say thank you for making it this far, and God bless.